Hello everyone and welcome. Apple just refreshed their iPad Air with the newly launched iPad Air 5, and now, due to all of the upgrades included, it brought it ever more closely to the iPad Pro in terms of performance. So this raises a valid question. Which one of these two should you actually buy? Before we get to that though, I want to thank everybody who's taken the time to sub to the channel. And if you're new here, I'd like to ask you to click on that subscribe button and turn on that bell notification so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. First, we're going to talk on the improvements on the iPad Air. Externally, basically, it's the exact same model as before, and really the design was pretty cool beforehand, so if something's not broke, don't fix it. The big changes though happen under the hood. You get the M1 chip now paired with 8 gigs of RAM, which is actually double what the previous model had. So that's a big improvement right there. The M1 chip itself doesn't need any further introductions. It's Apple's extremely successful and versatile in-house design, powering everything from the Mac Mini to MacBooks to the 24-inch iMac, the iPad Pro, and now finally the Air. I wonder when Apple's going to take the step to actually fit this into an iPhone. We'll see. Similarly, the port has been upgraded in speeds, but critically not yet to Thunderbolt level speeds like in the iPad Pro, so Apple kind of held back there a little bit. Just as important as the internal hardware, for me personally, is the new front-facing camera, which now supports Apple's center stage functionality, which means it centers you in the image when having video calls. I find that extremely useful, and it was a no-brainer for Apple to include. On top of everything just mentioned, there's now 5G connectivity along for anyone that needs cellular on the go. And that's pretty much the extent of the improvements. I would say the bulk of this is centered obviously on the performance and the longevity of this tablet. That M1 chip is going to last for years because it powers so many Apple devices and it's actually really powerful. Let's not forget that when Apple rolls out iPadOS updates, it's usually the amount of RAM in the device that is the deciding factor on which devices get kept on supported for longer and which are dropped. So those 8 gigs of RAM make a huge difference. Like I said, it's double from its predecessor, which means this iPad can be around for like 5 years, probably more if Apple wants it to. I have no idea, but it's not going to be any less than 4, and you can be pretty certain of that. Now let's focus on the main question. Should you buy the iPad Air or should you buy the 11-inch iPad Pro? The differences between them still exist, but they're actually narrower than ever before. First of all, let's start with pricing. So in their base configurations, the iPad Air is $599, so $600, while the iPad Pro is $800, so $200 more expensive. However, the devil's in the details. The storage on the iPad Air is actually half that of the iPad Pro at just 64 gigabytes compared to the 128 in the iPad Pro. More on that later in the video. If you spec them identically for 256 gigabytes of storage, the difference narrows down to $150. So let's see what those $150 to $200 extra gets you. Well, the iPad Pro, on top of what the iPad Air offers, also has quad speakers, and it also has a better display, which is in fact where most of the differences are actually centered. The iPad Pro benefits from Apple's ProMotion technology, which is Apple speak for a high refresh rate display going all the way up to 120 Hz. Also, the display on the iPad Pro gets a tiny bit brighter at 600 nits versus the 500 on the iPad Air. You get Face ID on the Pro, whereas you get Touch ID on the iPad Air. And really that's about it when it comes to differences. Of course, the rear cameras on the iPad Pro are better. You have a dual camera system and a single camera system on the iPad Air. I really don't care about rear cameras on iPads, sorry, or on any tablet for that matter, so I'm just gonna pretend they don't exist. And on the face of those facts, I would honestly pick the Air because it's a lot cheaper. And I'm a cheapskate, I don't like to spend too much on devices, and really 90% of people would be better off with the Air because the improvements that the Pro brings really don't affect the experience all that much. So the display. 120 Hz sounds amazing until you realize that it's not really visible all of the time. For instance, in gaming, there's only a handful of games that go above 60 Hz in iOS right now. Maybe that will change in the future, 2-3 years down the line. But let me say this, the display on the iPad Air 4 was absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure the one on the Air 5, which is the exact same as before, is more than up to the task as well. So if you're looking for a great vibrant display, the iPad Air will do the job perfectly fine. The biggest potential beneficiaries of that high refresh rate display on the iPad Pro would probably be, I don't know, graphic artists, people who work in design, and who work with the Apple Pencil a ton on the device and who want to pick up an iPad especially for that, they will certainly notice improvements. But like I said, 90% of people won't, and I'm in those because I can't draw. So I'm never going to use an Apple Pencil with my iPad, so that's why I would personally go for the iPad Air. However, that's not the entire story, and I can't wholeheartedly recommend the base iPad Air because of the aforementioned storage issue. You see, my first iPad that I've ever owned was the iPad Air 3, which I picked up in 2019 in its base configuration, and I loved it to bits. But it had the same 64 gigabytes of storage, and that was 2019. This is 2022. Apps are getting bigger, updates are getting bigger as well. The reality is, by the time I sold my Air 3 late December of last year, the storage was pretty much full. Yeah, granted, I had one too many apps perhaps, I had downloaded one too many movies and forgot to delete them afterwards. The reality is, I was getting a little bit constrained in terms of storage space, and this may very well happen to you as well a couple of years down the line. And this makes it especially more difficult to recommend because, like I said, the M1 brings a lot of longevity, a lot of potential longevity to the iPad Air 5. So if you're in a situation 4 years down the line when you have to delete half of everything that's on your tablet to just install the latest iPadOS update, that may actually not be ideal. And I kind of fault Apple for this. They're kind of pigeonholing you in a decision because if you upgrade the storage on the iPad Air 5, it goes to $750, and now you're talking just $50 difference between it and the base iPad Pro. And basically at that point it's just $50 extra from the iPad Air 256 to the iPad Pro 128, and it's really difficult to choose between the two, honestly. But really, I would kind of still lean towards the Air at the end of the day. I think it's a fantastic device. I think the performance is going to be absolutely phenomenal. I think Apple is making a bit of a statement here. They're making sure that they're really without rival in terms of the tablet space. Like in the smartphone space, anybody can compete, whatever. Apple still has a dominant position, but they own the tablet market, right? They sell more tablets than everybody else. I think the next 2 or 3 combined, if I recall correctly. And they really want to prove to everybody that they're still in charge. And that's why they're leveraging the M1 chip. Let's be totally honest about it. The M1 is completely unnecessary in the iPad Air. The previous model was no slouch, and if they put the A15 in it, would be totally fine. But they upped the ante a little bit in terms of performance. They put in the full-fledged M1 chip with 8 gigs of RAM, making the new iPad Air absolutely a fantastic product, in my honest opinion, if you're looking to spend a little bit more than the base iPad. Having said all of that though, while the iPad Air is absolutely phenomenal and I love it, I still consider the base iPad to be the best value for money iPad in Apple's lineup. And with that, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.